So all I got to say to you, flea-bitten, plague-ridden serf, so blindly acquiescent. When an angry mob is forming, what the fuck wilt thou do? Damn, it feels good to be a peasant.
It is September 17th, 2017. This is the Dissident Peasant podcast. I'm your host, Jeff the Dissident Peasant, also known as Jeff in Georgia. Today's episode is brought to you by the League of Extraordinarily Progressive Southern Gentlemen, because if conservatives had a good idea, it would die of loneliness. On today's show, DACA repeal. It's up in the air. What is going on with that? I will tell you, at least as far as I can see. Big day for single payer this last week. Many people coming out to support it, including anyone worth a damn, potentially running for president. Talk about what that means for a theory of political change. Talk about a Seattle Seahawks player in Vegas and intersectionality. And Hillary Clinton, she's still up to her public appearances. And I don't find them particularly good or wise. I'll tell you why. And I'll also tell you why it doesn't really matter, I don't think. But first up on today's show, I want to get a little personal for you. If I sound a little down, it's because modern capitalism's been kind of rough on your old peasant this week. Just been feeling a bit withered, is all. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some of the things that are afflicting me and get a little personal. Because, growing up, I don't know about you, in my family, talking about money was tacky. It wasn't something we did openly. My parents never discussed finances of the family in front of me. We certainly never talked about how much money we did or didn't have growing up. It was a fair bit. We were solidly middle class, certainly, especially before the divorce. But I think in this country, we need to start getting over this. And the reason I think we need to start getting over this is because I see more and more that everyone has an atomized view of poverty. Not everyone. Many people. Many people are saying it. They have an atomized view of poverty. What does that mean? It means that they view their own circumstances in isolation. And they're not connecting patterns that are causing them to be in that situation, along with millions of their countrymen and women. Let's say you went to school and you didn't finish with a degree, right? Something happened. You got sick, or someone else got sick, or you just couldn't hack it, or whatever. It's fine. Well, you didn't do the right thing, right? So if you have a bad job, that's your fault. If you did finish, maybe you got a degree in art or music, right? Something that I find very valuable. I love that stuff. But it's not something our society really values with money. Not modern capitalism, certainly. And so, if you're working as a barista at Starbucks with a Bachelor of Arts degree, that's your own fault, right? And if you're living in a studio apartment and can't afford to start a family, that's your own fault. Let's say you did go to school and you did go to a field that was good, that everybody told you to go into, like computers, and you learned how to program, right? Oh, but you went to a community college. Oh, you know what? We're looking for more qualified graduates, right? We don't want people we have to train at all. We want them to walk in the door and make us money. And lots of people need jobs, so we can do that. So if you went to a community college, right, we don't recognize the end of the school, so we're just going to put it at the bottom of the stack. Right? Or the computer algorithm processing your resume and cover letter more likely will be put at the bottom of the stack. Et cetera, et cetera. Everybody thinks of these circumstances as personal, and they are, right? But I don't think that you should have to do necessarily all the quote-unquote right things in order to survive in this country or even thrive. It just shouldn't be so. It offends my sense of justice. Even somebody with only a high school education should be able to live in dignity, pay their bills, have a little left over for fun, a little left over to save, right? And that used to be possible in this country, at least if you were white, definitely if you were male, broadly speaking, but it isn't the case anymore. I'm not sure to what extent it was true even for white people in all across the country. We live in many different regions, different governments, different ways of life. The South has never been particularly prosperous for the mass of people living there anyway. A lot of money in cotton, though. Look up on that. In any case, the other thing that gives me some cold comfort, and I hesitate to even bring this up, but I do think it's important to remember that for most of human history, most of the time, most people lived in misery. They were ruled by a king or an emperor, or a chieftain or a warlord. Something like that, right? They lived in despotism. They had very little say in the governance of them or their people, and they had very little say in what their representatives did and didn't do with tax money or its collection. They weren't peasants yet in the ancient era, but we certainly had slaves, and we certainly had plebs, right? And we certainly had a lot of problems and throughout the Roman Empire, certainly, of masses of working class age men with nothing to do and no employment to be found. I'm just saying that, you know, democracy is a relatively recent invention. The United States, not that old, and its democracy leaves a lot to be desired, but it is the first one. And it's crumbling. It's crumbling, and it's crumbling in a lot of ways. I'm going to help explore those ways on this podcast. But I wanted to take this opportunity just to tell you that if you're listening to this and you're not rich, right? Most people aren't. Something like 2/3 of college grads are employed in a field of study like unrelated to their degree. They don't work in their in any field related to their major. I don't. Maybe you don't either. Or maybe you don't have a college degree, or maybe you have many college degrees and you still can't find work. Or maybe you have a relatively decent job, but you're still getting squeezed. You're still having to work 50, 60 hours a week or whatever. I don't know your original circumstance, but I want you to know that you're not alone. A lot of people are struggling, tens of millions of them, and they're not all stupid. They're not all drug addicts. They didn't all screw up their lives. They didn't all mess up. They didn't all deserve this. They shouldn't all just have to work harder. So if you're one of those people, I want you to know the Dissident Peasant is looking out for you as best he can in his own little way. And I hope that you know that it's not your fault. So hang in there. If you can. If you can. The reason I mock this idea of just trying harder is I will tell you my origin story as the Dissident Peasant. Once upon a time, I'm trying to keep this vague. Once upon a time, though, in high school, I was a sophomore, and I was really into music. I was so into music, and I was so good at music that I actually obtained a small student leadership position my sophomore year in the marching band. We were running the rookie camp for the freshmen who were a year younger than me for a week before the full camp started, and it was time for a water break. So the director called a water break and told everyone that he didn't bring enough water, and so everyone needed to run as fast as they could to the water jugs in order to make sure that they got water, because he didn't get enough for everyone. And everyone took off running towards the jugs, and I remember I instantly knew what was wrong, and I approached him immediately. I walked straight up to him, and I said, "Hey, I want you to think about something. In your ideal world, where everyone runs as hard and as fast as they possibly can towards those water jugs, guess what happens? Some of them still don't get water, no matter how hard they try, because some of them will be slower than the others." We need to provide water to all of them. It's really hot outside. It's dangerous for them not to be hydrated. And he looked at me and he nodded, and we got more water. Now, I don't know if he actually had more water on the way or was planning on making another trip, but I remember that moment very vividly. I don't want to throw my old band director under the bus. He was a good guy. I don't know if he had water on the way or not, but I remember that offending my sense of justice, my sense of fairness, and the metaphor extends to the modern world. Let's say the entire adult population of the United States all works really hard as they can. All the ones that can go to college. All the ones that can finish college do. All the ones who try to get middle-class jobs. Are they going to succeed? No, some of them will fail because there aren't enough jobs. Imagine a conservative's, or I should say a libertarian maybe's, ideal world where everyone strives to be their own master. Some will fail, and they're not human refuge. I mean, if you want to go that way, the social Darwinist way, I'm really done arguing with you, right? In any case, the main point that I wanted to make with this little intro was just that if you're going through rough times, you're not alone, and you shouldn't feel alone. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on. I wanted to talk about DACA, because Trump is thinking about not ending it after all. A lot of people, even smart people, seem to be confused about this. So I want to put things in perspective. Once there was a Republican president of the United States who achieved the office through dubious circumstances, and his name was George W. Bush. And he saw that the immigration system in the United States was broken. He wanted Congress to pass a bill that he could sign reforming it, but he never got that bill. The next president of the United States, Barack Obama, also recognized that the U.S. system for immigration and enforcement was broken, and he also wanted Congress to pass a bill reforming it. And he probably felt as if his record numbers of deportations achieved credibility with the GOP in this effort, and he was wrong about that, and he was never sent a bill to sign. But shortly after realizing that he was never going to get sent a bill, he implemented a policy called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It stipulated that minors brought into the country without proper documentation or going through immigration and customs could nonetheless apply to the federal government and receive some legal benefits, with the promise that this information wouldn't be used to initiate deportation proceedings against them without cause. If you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend Stephen Robbins over at Redirect podcast. That's Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives with Stephen Robbins. It's a great show. I listened to it today, actually. But by maintaining a clean record and meeting other fairly stringent requirements, they could live and work in the country legally, and they didn't have all the legal protections of a legal resident or a citizen, but their condition nonetheless was improved. And today, in 2017, another Republican president who assumed the office through dubious circumstances and is in charge, technically, and he launched his campaign by maligning immigrants and undocumented people as murderers and thugs and drug dealers the first day. And he stayed on message, true to his core brand proposition the whole time. And so early this month, after months of investigations gnawing at him and his cronies, and with no major legislation or any accomplishments at all to boast of, he had to do something. And his instinct is going to be to do something that ends something Obama did. Because nothing's worse than Obama. And he desperately needed something he could sell to his base. And his motives were plain. He tried to end DACA because he thought it would gain him political support. And he probably made a mistake on the issue that he chose. September 3rd through 5th, YouGov poll found 57% of Trump voters in favor of ending DACA, with another 20% not sure, and presumably most of the remaining nonetheless would not consider it a deal breaker, so that would appear to be a smart move of Trump. A Politico morning consult poll around the same time found 2/3 of Trump voters wanting to keep the program. So who knows for sure? But if I had to bet, when you're dealing with the GOP and your choice is racism or not racism, I bet racism. So I'd go with the YouGov poll myself. But either way, my guess is that Trump trades his signing a bill providing legislative protection for DACA recipients for something he can call a wall, right? And he has to include Pelosi and Schumer in this because, like I said before, the GOP is driven by a pack of mindlessly belligerent know-nothings to a person. They have no plans, no real plans. They've been running on nothing but lies and air for over 30 years, probably, the conservative movement in this country. And when they get all the levers of power, they don't know how to use them. I do concede that this is all probably less palace intrigue than middle school drama, but it's important to make something clear. This all started DACA ending because Trump was responding to his voters. He wanted to please his supporters with something because he feels he's not doing that. And he's feeling increasingly isolated in the White House. He may be adult, but even he instinctively responds to political pressure from his base. Elections have consequences. This is why a bad Democrat is still better than any Republican by a mile. Bad Democrats respond to pressure from their base, even when it makes them unhappy or uncomfortable, like Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, I know context is important in one-party districts of any kind. If you live in a blue state with arcane, inaccessible primary processes, this pressure is less effective. Thinking a lot of New York right now, Rhode Island. And I can't really speak to that experience, having never lived in a place like that. But it remains the case that politicians respond to what they think their voters want, at least some of the time. I have no doubt in my heart that Trump is a racist and a bigot. And he truly does believe that many DACA recipients are racists and criminals who should be deported. But even he will sign legislation preserving DACA if he thinks he can get something out of it and sell a border security wall to his base. If he thinks that's going to be a win with his political base, he will do it, even though he's a racist. What's in his heart is less important than how he responds to political pressure. And imagining Hillary Clinton doing this is laughable. The polling might be unsure on this issue, but none of those polls found majority support for ending DACA among Democrats or independents. Reversing this of her Democratic predecessor in this hypothetical scenario would be electoral suicide. I don't think she's even that dim. So if you worked against Hillary in the general and you care about these people, you owe them an apology. And you owe it to them whether or not we get a bill. You owe it to them whether or not we get DACA. Because let me tell you something. The stress and the terror that this causes among hundreds of thousands of people and their families is real, and it has a cost. They lose sleep. They're afraid to go out. They're afraid to go to their check-ins. They miss appointments. They miss opportunities. They fight with each other at home. They cry and they hold each other in the dark right now because they think they're going to be sent back to a country that they have no ties to. How are we going to give that back to them? How are we going to give them that time and sleep? How are we going to bring them a sense of safety and security? You can't. So if you're still feeling good about that vote for a Green New Deal or some libertarian nonsense, I don't know why. And I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, because you should hate me. Because you're either too stupid to have figured out how destructive you are, or you don't care. And either way, you're no ally of mine. And I'd urge anyone hosting anyone like that on their platform to dismiss them immediately. The Young Turks. Because like I've said before, you need two things to be a good liberal pundit or a leftist. Whatever. As an aside, around here, being a liberal is about the worst thing you can be, so that's what I am. You can call me whatever you want. I'm ready to nationalize the entire financial industry if that gives you a taste of where I am politically. But you want to be a good pundit on the left, you need to have solidarity, and you need to care about what's true. And fighting against Hillary Clinton because you have a severe lack of imagination, because you couldn't see past your vitriol towards her personally, you helped bring us to this. You don't have any legitimacy with me. I would urge anyone listening to those people to remember that. Okay, so it's time for our sports ball segment. I love sports ball. So, recently, I guess last Wednesday, Michael Bennett, who plays for the Seattle Seahawks, had an incident with the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. They were apparently chasing after some other guy after gunshots rang out. It grabbed Bennett, pulled a gun on him, threatened to blow his fucking head off, and physically restrained him. Before he knew what was happening. You can read his open letter that he published. It's easy to find. The police department disputes this, of course. They say they have no evidence that there's any racial profiling involved, and they tried to explain it to him at the scene, and he said he understood and had no problem with what the officers did, but police officers tend to close ranks in these sort of situations. I got no faith in that explanation at all, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about intersectionality. I know it's easy for me, really, as a white guy, come at it from the other side, from class side, but, you know, Michael Bennett is a millionaire. He's the 1%, man, and it did not save him. It didn't save him one bit. He got a gun pulled on him by some cop making 5 figures a year. On the other hand, I would say that, you know, really what he is a modern day gladiator in a lot of ways. And this was considered very low class in ancient Rome, and it's not necessarily considered a super high class in America these days. It might be something to think about, but in any case, I don't find myself agreeing with Jimmy Dore much these days, but he did say something once that I've heard before, and the idea that the cops are really a type of armed gang for the state is not a bad metaphor at all. We need that gang to keep order, but we also need that gang's leash to be extremely short. There needs to be consequences for this. There won't be, of course. He may get a settlement out of the city. He has retained an attorney. Michael Bennett has. But I doubt it will lead to any meaningful reforms because, frankly, stuff like this has been happening for many years. And the Justice Department is certainly not interested in any consent decrees or enforcement or supervision of any of these state or local police forces to make sure that they uphold the Constitution of the United States. They're going to let them do what they do. Another reason elections have consequences, I suppose. Green New Deal. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add in terms of single payer, except to say woohoo. It's great to see, you know, a couple dozen or so Democrats come out co-sponsoring legislation for single payer for a really great comprehensive healthcare plan for the United States. Of course, there are details missing. Democrats don't control either House of Congress or the presidency or the courts or a majority of state legislatures or governorships. So now is the time to dream and get out the broad brush, right? Before we actually take power. You choose a destination before you choose a route. And we've chosen the destination. This really shows the power of political coalitions. Again, why even a bad Democrat is better than a Republican. You know, you saw Joe Manchin, maybe. I did. They asked him about single payer, and he thought it was an issue that should be explored. And then they asked him the next day, and he backed off of that. But even Joe Manchin is waffling on this, and Joe Manchin's about as worthless a Democrat as you will find, in my humble opinion. And you look at Hillary Clinton these days, she's feeling isolated and vulnerable on this issue. I think she instinctively knows that a large faction of Democratic voters we're not happy with her decision not to campaign more extensively on universal programs for people like this. And this is good because it hits people really right where they're at. You know, right behind wages, probably, I'd put it as an issue. I haven't seen polling on this, but, you know, generally in a job, it's your second question. How much does it pay and what are the benefits? And by benefits, you usually mean like healthcare, dental, eye, pet insurance, whatever. But healthcare up top, certainly. So it's a great issue to be running on. It's a great that many people potentially running for president in 2020 are getting onto this idea. And I personally also don't care, along with Sam Cedar, whether or not they mean it. I'm happy to see them say it. It's important not to set up a no-win situation where if they say they're not for single payer, we bash them. And if they say they are for single payer, then we doubt their sincerity. And that's all we do. It's fine to doubt their sincerity. I certainly do in some of those cases, but I'm still happy to see them going through the motions because ultimately that makes it harder for them not to pull the trigger when the time comes. We will hold them accountable if that is the case. This is how change happens. So, big week for single payer. Hope everyone's happy to see that. We need a little bit of hope in the world. And so I think this is something to be hopeful about in the medium to long term. Finally today, I want to talk a little bit about Hillary Clinton. She was still out last week saying some things that were good and some things that were really not good, in my opinion. She's been blaming Joe Biden. She's been blaming Bernie Sanders. She's been pleading that she almost ran on a universal basic income. She is still taking veiled shots at Bernie like, quote, when you don't deliver, it will make people even more cynical about government, end quote. I wish she would have a little bit of self-reflection or introspection when she says these things. I'd also like her to maybe not project quite so hard when she says things like this, quote, we've shrunk the political process to such a narrow set of questions, and that's in the interest of both the far right and the far left, both of whom want to blow up the system and undermine it and all the rest of the stuff they talk about. I think we operate better when we're kind of between center right and center left, because that's where, at least up until recently, maybe it's changed now, until recently, that's where most Americans were, end quote. I'm pretty sure she's almost certainly wrong about that. Data that I've seen on quote-unquote independents and people in the center are that, like, they have a lot of heterodox views, and that most of these so-called independents are actually reliable partisans for one side or the other over the past, say, 20 years. I don't know what exactly she means by we've shrunk the political process to such a narrow set of questions. I feel like she's contributed to shrinking the political process to such a narrow set of questions with a lack of imagination and vision, in my opinion. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm going to cut Hillary Clinton a bit of slack, I think. And trying not to make this personal, because I think a lot of people who criticize Hillary Clinton get too personal and it clouds their judgment and they go too far. The quality of mercy is not strained, right? Though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us shall see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. Speaking on a human level, I think Hillary Clinton is feeling isolated and vulnerable. She did go through a lot in the campaign that was not fair, certainly. James Comey was not fair. Russia was not fair. The media was not fair, certainly. It's not all her fault, and I don't really care how much she takes responsibility for or not. I just want her to learn valuable lessons. That would be my preference. But even if she doesn't blame herself, and I think she probably does at least a little bit, she knows that millions do, and that's why she's lashing out at a lot of different groups and people, some of whom deserve it and some of whom don't. I'm not sure Joe Biden's really responsible for her failure in any material way. I don't think Bernie Sanders is either. Vladimir Putin and James Comey are another story. And most of the defenses I see of her book and her book tour are she has the right to say whatever she wants and a man wouldn't go through this. And I don't see any positive arguments for her statements or their timing. You know, nobody's asking, at least nobody reasonable is asking for a police officer to march in and arrest her for speaking out about this stuff. Yes, she has the right to write a book, and she has the right to go on tour, certainly, but I don't think that she's really doing anybody any good except maybe herself and her own bank account. But I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that that's not why she's doing this, that she really thinks that this is some sort of vindication for her. I think that's pretty isolated, though, to a few diehards on Twitter and the Hillary Clinton and immediate circle around her. If you look at this rush to co-sponsor universal health care, I believe I called it single payer earlier, which may not technically accurate, but we're going for universal coverage. That's the destination. You know, this rush for a universal program is leaving her behind. This idea that we need to find ourselves in the center of the center in order to balance, you know, the competing demands of the far left and the far right, and be where most voters are. This is nonsensical thinking. This is not how it worked, and if it was, then Hillary Clinton would be president today, and a ton of Hillary Clinton Democrats would be in Congress right behind her. I'm glad to see a stable majority coalition on the left evolving away from her and leaving her behind. I'm sorry, Hillbots, no hate. Sexism memes aside, this way of thinking needs to die, and quick, because the awesome power of the United States nascent police state is in control of reactionary nutjobs and white supremacists. We don't have time for this. We need to unite behind universal popular programs. That's the only way we're going to have any chance of winning elections in the current context in the United States. Because we don't have time to wait another 4 years even. We need to start next term, 2018. If we don't take back the House then, we need to come dang close. Certainly. But all that is for another time. Folks, that's what I've got for you this week. I was your host, Jeff the Dissident Peasant. Do you think this podcast sucks? I sometimes feel like it does. But if you disagree with me, please go on iTunes or Stitcher and write me a review. You can hit me up on Twitter at JeffHisJudeness if you want to cover any particular topics or have my opinion said on anything in particular. Otherwise, I'm just going to ramble on and on. I am working on getting some guests soon, so it's not just me talking for half an hour or so. All right, guys. See you next week. Stay dissident.
Our rewards are not in heaven.
Money tough and union made.
We can fight but strong together.
Money tough and union made.
Divided we fall, united we stand.
Money tough and union made.
It's a working woman and a working man.
Money tough and union made.
We not waiting for judgment day.
Money tough and union made.
Plenty tough and union made.
Money tough and union made. Money tough and union made. One long struggle day by day. That's how we got to live this way.